More confirmation today about the human impact of energy policy, with more than 130,000 households forced to go on hardship plans just to keep the lights on. And it's no surprise given gas and electricity have risen by nearly 200% over a 20-year period. Joining me now to try and make sense of why an energy-rich nation as we are is inflicting this sort of pain on ourselves, Sky contributor Chris Uhlmann. Well, Chris, hard to be surprised, I should say, by these statistics out today. But when you get that sort of number, when you get over 100,000 people on support payments, basically, you got to feel the worm is turning when it comes to ordinary people understanding now the human impact of these energy policies.
Yes, Peter, because everyone, all ordinary people, can see the truth now written large in their electricity bills, and they can measure the distance between that and the words that come out of the climate change and energy minister's mouth. Now, last week on Sky, Chris Bowen said it had been the biggest fall ever in electricity prices. It was measured by the Australian Bureau of Statistics in the Consumer Price Index. You thought, that sounds a bit odd, so we'll go and have a look. And you go and have a look and you find that what's happened is that it's 180 degrees in what the minister was saying, because power prices had only fallen because of massive state and federal government subsidies. And if you took those away, they'd actually risen again by 0.7%. Now, Chris Bowen may take people for mugs, but I don't believe that they are. And if he keeps gaslighting people like this, he's just digging an enormous hole for himself and the Labor Party come the next election.
Yeah, as a long-time journalist, though, doesn't that make you angry that he gets away with these glib lines? I mean, today he was talking about rooftop solar, touting it from the sort of rooftop. But the regulator says there's a real problem now. Too much solar risks pushing the grid to breaking point. They might take away these feed-in tariffs. I mean, this is what gets people angry, that you're getting such mixed messages, particularly from the politicians, that are a long way from the facts.
Yeah, Peter, over the course of the last year, while I was investigating the documentary for Sky, The Real Cost of Net Zero, I've gone from being agitated to being furious about what's going on, because it's more and more obvious to me that the energy ministers that are running this, and it's all a political exercise, by the way, that the integrated system plan is a response to the politics to get to 82% renewable energy by 2030. Now, that's a political target. That's not a target that's been put in place by electricians or physicists or scientists. It's entirely a political target. When you're talking about rooftop solar, they're going to need in future a lot of what they call CER, customer energy resources, which is your rooftop solar, but you'll also need to have batteries. And what they don't need in the middle of the day is this massive lump of electricity which comes through, and they call it the duck curve. In fact, in California, they now call it the canyon curve. It's so large. It floods the zone. It drives those that need to be in the system later in the day essentially out of business and out of the marketplace. So guess what? Retailers aren't going to want that big lump of power from you, and those subsidies that you used to get, they're not going to be subsidies anymore unless you get batteries and spend all that money to mop that up. Then eventually you will be charged for putting that electricity onto the grid. So what do you think is going to happen then to the targets that they've written into their plan for more people putting on rooftop solar? I don't think there'll be a lot of excitement for it in future. So all of these plans are simply things that are written in some kind of analyst's diagram. They don't match up with anything that's happening in the real world, and nothing in this system adds up.
And the short-termism of politics nowadays means that these ministers turn over faster than ever, the governments turn over faster than ever. Chris Bowen will be, off working for a UN climate body when all of this proverbial hits the fan.
Yes, and that's why people should not be letting him get away with it now, and that people need to become themselves a little bit more energy literate. Journalists need to understand how this system's working, and they also need to be asking questions about what's going wrong with it. But unfortunately, too often, too many have just bought the spin that renewables essentially can run a grid. They cannot. Wind and solar on their own will never form an electricity system. They'll always have to be supported by something. At the moment, that's coal. In future, it will be pumped
Chris, can I just jump in there?
Or batteries. Yeah.
I think the problem is I cut my teeth on policy before I really got into the politics. And I think the policy problem here is this is a system that's incredibly complex. but it's actually without all the emotion. It just comes down to engineering and physics reality. Most journalists gloss over the detail. They're trying to file their copy for deadline. They are, like, I guess, most ordinary Australians, reading through these reports. They're deliberately dense. You have to go into the footnotes and then at the back to the end notes. You have to do your homework, and it's just not being done. So they just regurgitate the press release, and governments of both sides get away with it. You're the exception.
Oh, yeah, and look, and I think, and I think there are a lot of people now who are trying to work a lot harder on that. But I've got to say that there are a great number of journalists in the industry who simply have bought the idea that the system can run on wind and solar. It can't. And particularly in a country like Australia. So go and find an example of somewhere in the world that's got a footprint like Australia, not somewhere with heaps and heaps of hydro power, some Scandinavian country that doesn't look anything like us. Go and find a similar system anywhere in the world that's looking to hit the same kind of target with the kind of energy mix that we've got, and you'll find it doesn't exist. And anyone who's trying to do this has got 100% backup, and anyone who's tried it, like Germany, can't do it without gas. And once the Russian gas was cut off, guess what? The entire Ponzi scheme was exposed. So in the end, the system that's being built will need 15 gigawatts. That's enough power for 15 million homes, all the way through to 2025 and beyond, because in the end, the system operator has to have something it can depend on to keep the lights on.
Just a quick one. Environmental Defenders Office. A federal court judgment says they've got to pay Santos a whole lot of money for legal costs because they tried to shut down and failed a gas project in Australia's north. Well, today we learned the EDO is taking in millions and millions of dollars of donations from big companies like Patagonia and a foundation launched by the widow of Apple founder Steve Jobs. They also get a lot of taxpayers' money as well. But how is this not foreign interference, given our energy projects are essential to our national security?
Yeah, and it's part of a project in the end to cut off our natural resources, the things that we make all of our export income from. And I found that story fascinating today, and I hope to be alive one day when all of the information comes out from where all of the money is coming up from a very cashed up wind and solar lobby group in Australia. I'll take you back to 2015 though. This goes all the way to the top of the Democratic Party with John Podesta, was Hillary Clinton's chief of staff. He was getting messages about what was happening in the Sunrise Project in Australia as they were trying to shut down Adani, the Adani mine at that stage. You'll remember that. He was copied in on those emails. They were released by WikiLeaks. So where all of the threads lead is a very interesting thing indeed. And up till this year, he is still lecturing Australia about how it should conduct its affairs. And I'll point out the fact that in the Biden administration, no matter what it says, has grown over the last 10 years to become a bigger producer of oil than Saudi Arabia and a bigger producer of natural gas than Qatar. So I think that we should watch what other countries do, not listen to what they say.
Let's follow the money trail with some of our former politicians, former prime ministers as well, when you get to that one, Chris Uhlmann. That will be interesting in itself. All right, thanks for your time. We'll see you next week.